Hey, Oshinagaga, everybody. Welcome back to the Fractured Faith podcast. I'm your host, Joshua Hopping, and I am glad you guys joined us or joined me today. Us, I'm kind of plural. We plural today? I don't know. But anyway, welcome to the podcast. Today, I am going to chat a little bit about Christian nationalism. This is kind of a follow up post from the last episode we had, which we were actually talking a little about a kind of is Christianity inherently colonial? Just kind of follow up to that one because after that, and talking about the colonial nature of Christianity, I kind of want to talk about Christian nationalism because they are kind of hand in glove in so many ways. And actually, as a reflecting, this is actually almost a third in the series because the podcast episode about pacifism actually kind of connects that as well because if you have a Christian nation, you want to make sure everybody will fight for you. Quite frankly, you don't want pacifism. You really want people to go over and colonialize things for you, right? So there's kind of these elements are all at play. Some of this stuff I know is a little bit more they're kind of sideways political in some ways. They're theological and practical, and but they also have political ramifications. And a lot of that is because of the culture in which we live in. We see a rise of, Christian nationalism. We see a rise of colonialism coming back into our nation right now. And there are a lot of languages that are being thrown around. And I really want to address, especially as a Cherokee nation citizen and, kind of a lay theologian, in addition to lay theologian, I want to really be able to kind of unpack some of this stuff because how we view the scriptures and how we view the faith has ramifications beyond just us, disappearing up to the skies and go, oh, I'm going to heaven or something like that. There is a real world reality to what we live as well. And there's also the sense of this idea of mosaic of belief in deconstruction at play. Because as I kind of shared a little bit with you, and I'll share more on this particular episode, my faith has changed. I have been fractured. There were things that I was diehard on, and then I've come to realize that I messed up, and that was not anywhere even close. And so I think we need to chat about that and help those of you that are on the journey, wherever you happen to be on the journey and following Jesus of Nazareth, that maybe you can have your faith shift as well. And you can actually shift your faith. You can shift your church kind of and traditional background and kind of beliefs, but still stay strong to Jesus. He is much, 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 much bigger and much more mysterious than what's usually preached in a lot of churches these days in so many ways. So really want to help you guys broaden that scope a little bit. Now, for those of you who are new to the podcast, you may be wondering who is this guy and why is he talking about this? Well, as I previously mentioned, my name, also Cherokee Nation citizen. I'm a former pastor and church planner within the Vineyard movement. I have since left that. I actually kind of hang out with the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America at the moment, in case you're curious, the ELCA. I also hang out with some Methodists as well. And kind of a lay theologian wise, because I have my master's in theology and culture. So I have definitely dabbled in on the higher educational level for theology. I've written 2 theology books here and Not Yet, What is Kingdom Theology and What Does It Matter, as well as the mystery, the way, and the journey, which is another phenomenal one. It's actually my favorite one so far. A business book, and then I am actually currently working on a Cherokee theology book that will be coming out. Well, I don't know when. I'm still actually about halfway through it. So, in other words, I am somebody who's deep into the weeds on a lot of this stuff. I love history. I love reading. You see my bookshelf behind me, piles and piles of various books and places. And I've been digging and thinking through this educationally as well as personally. So that's a little bit about who I am and what doing it. So like I said, I come at this from the weeds and as somebody from the inside in so many ways, and as somebody who's shifted my beliefs on there. So, one of the things to talk about that is when I grew up, I grew up in the Cherokee Nation on the reservation, and I actually still remember hearing a lot that the United States was a Christian nation. It was not, it was presented as fact. This was not an option. The history books that were written really was talking about how, God helped create this nation. I'm trying to remember the name of. There's a great whole. Oh, I can see the picture of it right now. Their homeschooling book about that was actually a whole series of them. I think the out there about Christianity and all the different things. I think it was the faith, the glory, or whatever else. I forget the name of it. It'll probably come back to me as soon as I get done with this section. But anyway, these history books that were actually talking about how divinely everything was in the Revolutionary War, how God granted and moved everything to make sure that the United States was formed as a Christian nation. And everything was presented on these divine things. And that even going back to even the pilgrims, where it was like, hey, this was the new Israel. United States or North America was this new promised land that they came into, and there was unpack all these Christian languages tied to it. And of course, as I got older, I started looking like, wait, this is a lot more complex. What's going on here? Especially when you realize that the British were actually fighting to protect the Native Americans. They were stopping the colonials from killing all the Indians, and that's why King George had his soldiers there, was to say, stop going in and killing all these Indians up in Ohio and the kind of Great Lakes area. And the colonial colonist says, no, we want to hold slaves, we want to take over the land, and they went and they did this. So complicated. And then, of course, even looking from a Cherokee viewpoint, to start unpacking that is there's a lot more complex in so many ways. So let's unpack this. Now, to kind of, first of all, let's talk about definitions, right? Talk about what Christian nationalism is. So Christian nationalism really at the core is the belief that the United States was founded as a Christian nation and should continue to be defined as a Christian nation, and defend Christianity in its laws, in its culture, and its public identity. Okay, it's not a denomination, it's not a church. It is a political, ideological view that fuses a particular version of Christianity with national identity. Okay, this is really important. This is why, again, you have a lot of different church people with church backgrounds, from Pentecostal to evangelical to mainline, all these people coming together and independence to be able to try to focus in on this identity and making America Christian in some ways, right? And so, and I even actually argues, you see that right now is some JD Vance and these different other kind of MAGA folks that say to be fully American is to be fully Christian, or at least to affirm Christianity at the center of his culture, which is crazy because you have people that are held up as kind of idols or heroes that do not are not Christian in their value system or their actions, right? But it's less about what you do and it's more about what you say, and that really gets into it. So you have organizations, though, like Freedom Forum, who describes Christian nationalism as a movement seeking to merge Christianity and American identity and civil life. The Kettling Foundation outlines elements that often accompany beliefs, like the ideal that the government should defend Christian identity, traditional social hierarchies, and certain groups are more authentically American as others. And I'll put some links to some of these articles below. There's actually about 3 or 4 articles I really love that pulling from, and you'll have them in the show notes. But so Christian nationalism, again, is less about personal faith and more of a political power and cultural dominance. And this is really, really key how to do it, right? It's not the personal faith anymore. You're moving from the personal faith into the political power, into that cultural dominance going in. Now, historically, this is not a new thing, right? This is nothing new to America. This has been from a long time, right? Coming in, like I said, even the Puritans showed up and they actually had very controlling, powerful kind of religious control over their groups, even if they were under the British. Britain itself actually was had that flirting with nationalism because Anglicanism was tied to the throne, and you even had Bloody Mary who came in as a Catholic and she was killing the Protestants and whatnot. So again, this whole ideal of these national religious and political connections does have a long history within Europe in a lot of ways. Even Martin Luther, I talked about hanging out with Luther in Jersey. Martin Luther himself, actually, there was a lot of fights and wars, the 30-year war there in Europe, of where different parts of Lutheranism and Catholics and other Protestant and Calvinism were all fighting each other because they all thought that their religious identity was could be dominance over and actually colonize or take over the other groups, and so all that was coming in. Now, when we go back to America, again, we kind of fast forward a couple hundred years and we're, 1700s coming, late 1700s coming into when America came in. You actually have this idea the Constitution does not establish a national religion. There's actually treaties with the Ottoman Empire that says that America was not a Christian nation in this things, and you had Muslims and Jews and people in America at the time. The First Amendment, of course, actually protects the free exercise of religion and prohibits establishment of religion. However, I will actually say that Native Americans were left out of that for up until 1978, which was again insane. 200 years later, before American Indians can actually have freedom of religion. But with that said, is we do know that a lot of the founding fathers that actually wrote the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the legal system was influenced by Christianity, because Christianity was the kind of the bread and butter, kind of the ideal of what was happening there. Just like you have people right now in America that have been influenced by Christianity, even though they do not attend the church, do not follow Jesus in any form or fashion, but they just kind of know about Christianity in that sense. And I would even say human rights, as we know, it was strongly influenced by Christianity. And you have to go back and do the history of human rights, because without Christianity, human rights did not really wouldn't be here. And that's again another episode. Maybe it's another one down the line. But there's also the Enlightenment philosophy. There is deism, this idea that God created the world and kind of went off another. There's a lot of other things that are kind of at play there within these founding fathers. They were by no means all uniform in their belief system. They were a lot of different areas. A lot of states had state religions, and yet the founding fathers decided to kind of end that, right? And they actually said, no, we don't want you all to have state religions, because again, they were coming from the, having the background of Europe and seeing how different European countries had fought each other and different Protestant groups had fought each other. The American founding father says, we don't want that, hence again, the First Amendment. Now, as the nation went westward, Christianity was used to justify the expansion. Manifest destiny, this ideal that the people of Israel, the white Europeans, were coming in, mostly British or kind of British heritage, and they were coming into the new promised land, and they were trying to take back. And it's the whole picture of the American Columbia woman just walking across the plains, driving out the animals, the buffaloes, and my people, the Indians, and then all the settlers or natives are coming behind them, right? They were, that was the picture of the manifest destiny, and it was couched in Christian Bible language. My ancestors, the Cherokee people, we were, ran out of Georgia and Carolinas on the Trail of Tears by Christians, and we actually had adopted, a lot of people had adopted Christianity, and yet it was the Christian freedom of religion people who came in and ran us out, because we were branded as quote unquote savages and not fit to be able to live. And that goes back to some of the white supremacist kind of ideals that within Christian nationalism is their sense of boundary markers of who is that person, right? Who actually fits within Christian nationalism, because not everybody fits in it, right? Even in America, historically, you had the immigration waves of the Catholics and Jews, the Eastern Europeans. They were viewed with suspicion because they weren't the British, they weren't the Baptists, they weren't the Anglicans, they weren't the right kind of Christians. They were the wrong kind of Christians. And I would say right now, a bunch of the immigration things are happening right now. There's a lot of the immigrants, a vast majority of the immigrants are coming up from kind of Central America in Mexico and even down South America. They are Christian. They are Catholic Christians, some of them Protestants, and they're very much committed to Christ in the scriptures, but they're the wrong color of skin and they're the wrong type of Christians. And so that's where we have a lot of these problems right now with, immigration, pitting rules around and border patrol. It's like, if it really was about Christ, you'd be letting these people in, right? You'd be really opening them up and doing them. So many churches have gone on mission trips to Central and South America, And yet, for some reason, we can't have them here, but we can go down there and tell them all about it. But we can't bring them here. It's just the hypocrisy is just insanity to me so much, right? Um, but that goes in white supremacy. I will call it that white supremacy run throughout much of its history. The United States was founded on white supremacy. And this is historical fact. Look at the Constitution. Okay. The Constitution has white supremacy. There is justifying slavery in the 3/5 rule about who Native African American slaves, and the way it actually Declaration of Independence describes the Native Americans. There is the sense that there's a supremacy of certain ethnic groups out of Europe are better and are only ones that are actually there. That is a reality of factual reality. Anybody who looks at the historical documents just with this benign, neutral eyes will see that white supremacy is in there. Now, there always is a substream of people pushing against that. If you look at slavery, there was the people that are pushing it. There were white people using Christianity to push against the value of slavery, just as much as you had white Christians using the Bible to promote slavery, right? So there is a complexity in there. But we have to remember this country was founded on racial differences. You had the white Europeans, you had even in white Europeans, there was different levels of that, right? Class systems even within there, because, the Jews were kind of suspicious. The Irish were kind of suspicious. We don't know about this. With the Britons were great. We're not sure with the French or whatever else. So there was even hierarchies within that. If you go in and really start looking at some history, you really start seeing that things are a little bit more complex. But then you had the Africans down here, you had the Indians over here, and there's kind of these levels coming into that one area. And all this was done through Christian language that was coming in. Now, what I think is fascinating is a lot of the enslaved Africans that came over actually were already Christians when they come in. This is a really cool book right here. It's called Forged in the Fiery Furnace by Dana Hayes. Phenomenal book, and it really kind of looks at the history about how a lot of these kind of these Western Africans that got kind of sold in slavery were Christians, and that's why Christianity was able to hang on within a lot of these historically black communities, and they have still developed a Christianity that's different than a lot of the kind of the white counterparts to it, which I think is just a fascinating concept in so many ways. So. But anyway, it kind of, again, as we develop it, again, it's trying to show you that this Christian nationalism is not necessarily a new thing. It's kind of been growing on that one. Now, in the 20th century, there was a shift in the 20th century. America became more religiously and racially diverse. You had the narrative of a singular Christian nation begin to weaken. It was more about democracy, and that was like democracy over and against communism. I think the Cold War was huge in being able to break it. And here's a great book right here. It talks about Cold War called Jesus and John Wayne by Christian Demes. And it kind of talks about how the influence in the Cold War had on American Christianity. And it really was bigger than I actually thought. But if we think about it, is American capitalism and democracy was the markers that separated us from communism. And communism, which was European in its originality, Marxist and even communist Russian stuff were all kind of European, and they had light skin. But then it went into Asia and it went to other areas. But that really. The economic kind of a democracy and capitalism became to be the focus point for a lot of the 20th century. And that's where you got the Native American Freedom Act or religion in 1978. You start getting a lot more vote rights and civil rights movements. You start getting black people be able to have a lot more power in voting, and Hispanics the same way, and Asians and so forth, right? So that kind of into it. But there's also a lot more sexuality, abortion, gender roles, and education. So then there was that backlash to that as well, where they're like, hey, we got to protect ourselves against this thing. We can't have everything go. We can't really have everybody goes to have sex, everybody has abortions, everybody do this one. We got to pull that back. And when I was pastoring in the early to mid 2000s, I remember people in my church, and we were pastoring a small rural church in Idaho at the time. And there were a lot of people there that were watching TV and news and church and pastors. And they would bring up this idea of the replacement theory. They were afraid that non-European populations were growing faster and having more babies than European, American kind of populations, and that they were going to be outnumbered. And they were afraid that once the non-white Americans were higher, there's more non-whites, then they assumed that the American freedoms, however they define that, would stop. That somehow that they would lose, I don't know, maybe lose their house or their place, lose their jobs, lose their freedom, lose their guns, lose their ability to have church. Apparently, all that was at stake. The whole family, whole society was at stake if there was more non-whites than there was whites. Which I remember looking at that going like, this is insane. Like, I remember, again, I grew up in the Cherokee Nation among Indians. I grew up among lots of different diversity. I went down to South America and Central America and the Philippines. I'm like, these are people, and there's some great people. And most people I ever met, they want freedoms. They want a freedom of religion. They want freedom of press. They want freedom to be able to say what they want to say, the freedom to marry who they want to say, the freedom to be able to get the jobs they want to get, but there was that replacement theory that was so prevalent, and it's grown and grown and grown. And now you hear it back with MAGA world in so many ways. And it really kind of shows this is about fear. Christian nationalism is about fear. It's fear of losing control. It's fear that the ways, the theologies and practices and things that we have set together that has come out of the European Western mindset is going to lose it. That's what you hear about the Western, the predominance of Western, civilization and how awesome we are. And that's another big one. They always talk about, that's tied into Christian nationalism. And let me tell you, Western civilization isn't the end all. Yes, Western civilization did have a lot of advances. There's a lot of technology. There's ACs in places and a lot of economic deals, right? But look at our suicide rates. Look at our rate of family destruction. Look at just the way our families are, ourselves, depression, anxiety. We are isolated. We if you look at just even the sense of happiness, every people make these studies about how happy you are, and we lose out so much of the time. So yeah, we have material stuff. We in America have a lot of material stuff. But we're not happy. I tell you, we're not happy, and there's problems. And we have a lot of Christianity. There are a lot of churches, and our churches are tied to material things, bigger buildings, and we're not dealing with our soul. We're not dealing with our spiritual disciplines. When's the last time you heard a church talk about sitting in meditation or sitting in silence or being able to sit in prayer longer than just praying for your car or your place? And when have we actually looked inside of us and say, you know what? How can I turn the other cheek? How can I really seek to love my neighbors as myself, regardless of who they are, right? So there's some rottenness within our culture that we need to be addressed. And yet Christian nationalism is about, how do I control that? And how do I then, be able to control over other groups, right? Because you think about it, if America belongs to Christians, what does that mean for the Jews or the Muslims, the atheists? How about for the Native Americans? Again, it wasn't until 1978, that's only 47 years ago, that Native Americans could actually practice their religion and spirituality without fear of being arrested or shot. And still, even then, we still don't have access to our spiritual places because a lot of our deals is we need to be back in location, right? We have our holy land. Katua is the motherland of the Cherokees, and yet, how can we go back there, right? We're in exile in Oklahoma. It's just, again, it's just so many layers. And yet we have Cherokees. We have people who are actually our national Christian nationalism within the Cherokee Nation. They open with prayers and they talk about God in places. And I'm like, no, like, don't fall prey to the same thing that the wider nation has done. And they're like, stop that. Which, if I turn right now from history and politics to theology, I will be real clear here. Christian nationalism is not Christian. Okay, Christian nationalism is not Christian, right? I know it's strong. I know I tend to talk about Christians being a bigger deal, but Christian nationalism is not a Christian viewpoint at all, okay? To be a Christian is to be a follower of Jesus, It's a discipleship identity. It's a relational, moral, spiritual deal. It involves loving and blessing your enemies. It's following the red letters of Jesus. It's turning the other cheek. It's humility, it's sacrifice, service, solidarity with the marginalized. To be a Christian is to follow Jesus. It's not to follow Moses. It's not to follow Paul. It is to follow Jesus and do what Jesus told you to do. A nation state cannot follow Jesus. A government cannot turn the other cheek. It must enforce laws. It must maintain borders. It must make cohesive decisions. It operates in the realm of power. And there's nothing inherently wrong with the government having power. That's the role. But there's a fundamentally different than discipleship. No nation can repent. No nation can be baptized. No nation can practice the Sermon on the Mount. Individuals can. Communities can. Churches can, because churches are built of communities of people, individuals that can practice the Sermon on the Mount. Governments cannot do that. They cannot do that. It must wield power. So when you say you have a Christian nation, you're speaking again metaphorically at least, and dangerously at worst, right? That doesn't make sense. It's oxymoron in so many ways. Because when Christianity becomes infused with power, it stops looking like Jesus, and it starts looking like control and exceptionalism, dominion, and that's not Jesus. That is not Jesus. Jesus laid down his power as the Almighty God. If he wanted control and dominion, he would have zapped us all. He would have forced every one of us to follow him the way he wants to. Maybe that's why I have a problem with Reformed theology of unreasonable grace. I'm like, no, we can reject the way God is doing. God in Jesus says, follow me, and yet there were people who turned away. Remember the passage in the Bible? It's like, hey, those who follow me must eat my flesh and drink my blood. And his disciples turned away from him. But he turned to the 12 and says, are you going to leave as well? And like, no. Where else? You have the words of eternal life. Where else should we go? Right? And there's a choice to be able to follow. And nations cannot do that. It's not. You just can't. You cannot do that in so many ways. And yeah, like I said, I've seen this in Native American community just as well as everything else, and it's insane. It is insane to be a Cherokee. Yeah, you can be Christian Cherokee. I'm a Christian Cherokee, but I think you could be a Cherokee Buddhist, or Cherokee whatever in different ways, right? Coming back to this Choctaw elder Stephen Charlton actually writes this in so many ways. I think I love this passage. He says, organized religion is built on conforming to dogma, results in conflict. It encourages exclusion. It opens a door to abuse by the institution. In contrast, disorganized religion tolerates individual differences, emphasizes communal celebrations of shared hopes, and draws people together. It gives them room to breathe spiritually and allows them to see themselves in the worship of the people. In traditional Native American spiritual systems, people can disagree about the interpretation because there's no impulsions to believe the same way. Those arguments never take center stage. Instead, dance takes center place in the community religious life. Dance is at the center because it is a collective expression of every person's hope and open invitation to people to participate along with it and how it does it. And that is a great passage right said again from Stephen Charlton. Is actually, I hold the book up here and it says ladders to the light. And it really kind of shows you that, even within Native American culture, we should be focusing on dancing, stomp dancing, power dance, whatever it could be, and not trying to emulate our the wider culture in so many ways. It's just, again, it boggles the mind that we tend to do so. Okay, I've been talking for a while now, so I'll kind of wrap it up here. We'll start closing with it. But, all right, let's close with this. Christian nationalism appeals to people because it promises clarity in a time of change. It offers stable identity. It reassures those who feel culturally disoriented and says, we know who we are and we know who we belong. But the gospel does not begin with national identity. It begins with the kingdom, not its word. It focuses on Jesus. Jesus did not die for a flag. He didn't die just for Hebrews or the people of Abraham. He died for people of all tribes, all nations, all religions, all groups. That's why at the end and between the throne of God, you see all ethnicities, all singing and looking differently. It's not about conformity, it's about diversity. Jesus proclaimed the reign of God. It crosses borders and languages and ethnic lines. If Christianity becomes merely a tool to defend national dominance, it ceases to be good news. I cannot tell you how important this is. I have to fight so much again because the Native Americans have been underneath this Christian nationalism BS so much that it's trying to teach them people about Jesus. They've been so abused. Go look at the boarding schools. Go look at the things. And like that's what Christian nationalism destroys and kills our children and our people. That's not Jesus. That is never Jesus. And I got to be careful. I'm going to start cussing here because it's so painful. But Christian nationalism is a political theory. It has no theological backbone. It is not Jesus in any way. And if you look at any Christian nationalism, they would be quoting the Old Testament. They'll quote Moses more than anything else. Yet when they quote Moses, they're going to leave out the year Jubilee. They're going to leave out the commandments of Moses not to charge interest. Look it up. There's the commandments. Even the prophets said, don't charge interest on your money or anything. We should not be charging interest. Okay. It leaves out the deal about not wearing clothing of two fabrics, right? There's so much that Christian nationalism do. They'll look and they'll pick and choose which parts of the Old Testament that they want. They will leave aside Jesus. They will not even look at Jesus. They will go over here and they will take a bastardization of the Bible as a political theory to control themselves, often, not always, often with ethnic supremacy built into it, where the ethnic group is. Because I will say there's nationalism in other areas. There's nationalism in Africa and in Europe and other parts of the world that has other ethnic groups, that's not just white supremacy, they have their own ethnic supremacy. So it goes beyond just this country. But if you look at our country in this area, you have that piece. So it does not. So again, when we think about Christian nationalism, when we hear the terms, and we hear politicians getting up there and talking about things, I want to ask you something. Does that look like Jesus? Does that act like Jesus? Does it look like the self-giving love that stands at the center of the gospel? And if it does not, it's not Christian. It is not following the Christ, Jesus of Nazareth. It is following something else. So no, this is not a Christian nation. This is a plural nation, and it should be, and I really want it to continue to be a diverse nation where we can have freedom of speeches to talk through and have conversations about all kinds of religions and diversity and all kinds of gender deals, LGBT, and all and sexuality and places and ethnic groups. All this, we need to have the freedom to do what we want and be able to have the freedom to have a conversation about it as we go through, rather than having the government come down and tell us what to do. Anytime the government forces us to control what we believe, we have a problem, folks. We just have a problem. So let us separate our faith in Jesus from our political idolatry that we have. We can still be patriots. We can still be patriots and say, hey, we want to be a U.S. patriot and we support our nation. That's fine, but let's not try to blend the Christian nationalism kind of concept together and try to defend it using the scriptures. Let's stop doing that. Let's stop. That's all I can say, guys. Let's stop. So. Whew, okay. I better stop. If you're going to stop, I better stop now. If I keep going, I might slip into some 4-letter words and that not be nice on this podcast, or even for my own soul in so many ways. So, thank you guys again for jumping in and listening. Hope you learned something. We kind of unpack some of this stuff. I'm not exactly sure what our next episode is going to be about. Hopefully I get back to some more theological concepts rather than just political ones. But I think we need to take a step back and look at passages. We need to look at what it means to look at colonialism and nationalism, because these are definitely real things that have impacted our lives in so many ways. So like, subscribe, share the podcast with those who can't. And thank you again for listening. Dona dagai until we meet again. Goodbye.